Well, it's Clear Whole Build. Just to tell you a little bit about how the title came about. I think that's a good way to begin, because many people think that it's an intriguing title, and that's precisely the idea. It's taken from a counter-insurgency concept, really, which is to do with clearing an area of perceived enemies, perceived and real enemies, then holding on to that area, and then building upon that advantage. You basically reclaim lost land. I've actually tried to turn the concept on its head by alluding to two things. One is that I think a lot of, as you know, I write a lot on conflict, matters of conflict, whether it's a Maoist rebellion or issues in the Northeast. And I've been, since 2009, focusing on issues of business and human rights, or actually the lack of it. And in that, I find that the state is very often hand in glove, and this is totally on the record, everything that I'm going to say. States almost act, not almost, but almost, they do act as extensions of corporate will, almost like departments of business houses. In doing so, it applies logic of clear whole build to actually get rid of citizens of India, communities which they should be participating with and taking care of, and they treat them as rebels. And they treat them as even anti-national elements, and I'll go deeper into it in the process of this conversation. So that's one aspect that I wanted to highlight about how businesses and the state are colluding. There's no other way to, are absolutely complicit in doing so. And I say this not as a communist, but as a card-carrying beneficiary of the Republic of India and its liberalization process since 1991, and even before that, and certainly since then. So I know what I'm talking about, and from that point of view, the other thing that I meant as a double meaning, if you will, is that I wanted to talk about the issue of human rights and hope that human rights, or the application of human rights, or the vigilance of human rights, or corporate social responsibility, that much abused phrase that businesses use for window dressing to make themselves look good in the eyes of the world, these would take root, would clear the area of obfuscation, of injustice, of indignities, of exploitation, of illegalities. There's no way of getting around it. Grand human rights illegalities and violations, which would put many companies, and I shall take their names in the course of this conversation, and governments, should there ever be interest on the part of legal eagles and or activists to do so, or even investors to do so, that these take root, clear the cobwebs and criminality, if you will, and complicity of business and politics, hold on to that advantage, and then build onto it for you could call it an inclusive economy, you could call it an inclusive government, an inclusive society. I won't even go that deep. I will say that make them part of your community, to build on the idea that human resource development must extend beyond the limits of a company and extend to the communities that they engage with. Corporate social responsibility must truly be responsible, and so on and so forth. So this is basically the root of what Clear, Hold and Build is all about. And the strap is really explanatory as well. It says hard lessons of business and human rights in India. And the purpose of writing this book is, in fact, it's quite curious, because I've been a business journalist since the time I started out with the Wall Street Journal's Asian edition in 1985. That's a long time ago. And since then, I've had a ringside view of a lot of economic development in India. And I have met several finance ministers, industry ministers, several CEOs, business planners, you name it, and been to Davos and been here and been there. Sort of really traveled the journey of India's reforms process since it began. And it was all about the brave new India, how we would grow, how we would develop, we'd have greater choices, live better lives, so on and so forth. But it never, ever took into account that there would be people whose permission, or even who you would need to ask. There was never any consideration of this idea of what is now becoming popular, of something called free, prior and informed consent. The great arrogance of power that our business houses and our governments, our administrators, bureaucrats, politicians, even the police to some extent, sort of took upon itself, or took upon themselves, was that there would be free, prior, and informed consent among government and business. That you were free to arrive at a memorandum of understanding to mine an area or build a factory somewhere with prior and informed consent among yourself, but you never applied that idea, that grand human rights idea of human rights and participation, to the communities that you went to. So, for instance, Vedanta Resources PLC had free, prior, and informed consent with its MOU with the government of Orissa, Orissa, to use the proper pronunciation, but it never bothered to approach the community in Orissa, in Lanjigar, in Kalahandi district, where Vedanta Resources PLC wanted to mine an entire hill range for bauxite. Now, if it had chosen to deal with the community and the community gave its clearance or okay as part of a discussion with the community, it's fine. But they never chose to do that, which is why Vedanta got into trouble. So it was, to my mind, it was a problem entirely created by Vedanta, where they went to the extent of using an agency of the government of Orissa, which are partners with Vedanta, by the way, in the mining project. Orissa Mining Corporation are partners in crime, I would say, in this case, where they came to an understanding that they would mine bauxite from these hills without consultation with the tribal people. And when they built a factory in order to mine, to refine this bauxite ore, to turn it into to alumina and then into aluminum. So it's a three-step process that they wanted to undergo, but or undertake, if you will. But they did the last process first. So arrogance of power and this free, prior, and informed complicity. I'll replace the word consent with complicity. In fact, I thought about this word right now. So thank you, Author TV. I'm going to use it now, but the copyright is mine, remains mine. And please note that. I'll sue you guys if you rip it off and use it on my behalf. Kidding. So they set up an alumina refinery even before they got any clearance to mine the bauxite. They put down between $1.5 billion US dollars to $2 billion US dollars to get this refinery up and running without having permission from the local community to mine bauxite in the area. Imagine the arrogance of power. Imagine the presumption that leads somebody to do this. And when in 2013, the 12 Gram Sabhas in the area decided to go against mining in that area, you basically had a white elephant of a refinery, which had gone ahead and set itself up. Now, the crazy part of this is, and the chilling part of this, and the scary part of this, and the real part of this, is that Vedanta Resources PLC, in their annual reports, gave indications with caveats, but that is usually fine print, that they would begin to mine at a certain date, and a certain month in a year. They would begin to use that bauxite ore in the alumina refinery plant by a certain time, would get clearances to expand that plant by a certain date and time, and none of it, and most important of which didn't come to pass. Now, did or did not the company then, or the business, mislead its investors, mislead its shareholders, mislead its stakeholders, mislead the government misled the people, it misled itself, all on account of a presumption. Now, I think that's a human rights violation right there. And even if it's not a human rights violation by any stretch of imagination, then it's a serious breach of corporate social responsibility. This is corporate social irresponsibility of the highest order. And it's no surprise that Vedanta has been in the trouble that it has ever since 2007 from very, very reputed investors dumping Vedanta stock on a regular basis. And I'm just taking Vedanta's name. It shouldn't be that I should be seen as a witch. This shouldn't be seen as a witch hunt for Vedanta. It's just like it's a high-profile name. It's a high-profile case. And why the hell shouldn't I talk about it? Because it makes my case that much stronger. But this is a journey that many, many companies in India have undertaken. They have fired from the shoulders of governments, and that is a very, very dangerous thing. A company like, a business like the House of Tata Sons, it has, even though you have people companies within the Tata empire. I'm calling it empire because that's what it is. Like Tata Consultancy Services, which is a high degree of engagement and reputation, and it comes out smelling like roses almost all the time. Two has an entity within the Tata Sons umbrella called Tata Steel. Now, which is a fine company. It's done wonderful things for more than 100 years, and so on and so forth. But what it has also done is that, and I think it cannot get away from the responsibility of doing so, is that while land was being acquired for the Kalinganagar project in Orissa for a 6 million tons a year steel plant, 14 locals ultimately died because the Orissa police fired upon them when they were protesting the setting up of a boundary wall on 2nd of January 2006. I think even one person being beaten is too much. 14 people died, and a policeman as well, who became the victim of the ire and the anger of the local villagers, tribal people. Now, Orissa police fired on these people. The government of Orissa gave the clearance, but the land was being acquired for Tata Steel. Now, in a court of human rights, in a court of corporate justice, would Tata be complicit? I think so. I really do think so. The irony of it is that government often doesn't think so. The business often doesn't think so. This incident naturally did not find any mention whatsoever in any Tata Steel annual report in India or with the filings with the American government or American authorities. The superintendent of police in Jajpur district, under which Kalinganagar comes, was recommended the following year for the Meritorious Service Medal usually awarded by the President of India, and he received it. He was subsequently moved to Bokaro steel plant as a Inspector General or Deputy Inspector General of Police. The district magistrate and collector of Jajpur district at the time was subsequently moved to a neighboring district in a similar role, and then became the managing director and subsequently chairman, and he held the role of CMD, and I think he still continues to hold it as we speak, of the Orissa Mining Corporation, of which Vedanta Resources PLC is a partner. Now, just imagine if you and I, and when I say you, dear viewers, I mean all of us, if any of us had done anything remotely approaching this, we would be in jail, our careers would be destroyed, our lives would be torn apart. We would be possibly under psychiatric care in some form or another, were we to even feel remotely remorseful about this. But these gentlemen lived long and prosper. 14 people died. Now, and the reason I mention this is to provoke you, to make you think, and Clear Hole Bill also chooses to do that. But it is not, I mean, what I'm saying to you might seem like a rant, but it is not intended as a rant. It is intended as engagement. So I use provocative examples to highlight cases, to bring you in to what you would call, these are my terms of engagement, if you will. So Clear Hole Bill is really about terms of engagement. And I'll explain why, because when I started to write the book, and I have a bit of a reputation in the marketplace, if you will, of conflict writing and discussion and conflict resolution, of being a bit of a loose cannon, to be a bit brutal in my approach, blunt, uncaring, anti-national, you name it, I've done that, etc., etc. But, and I'm sometimes taken to be as a bit of a rant head, if you will. But it's not entirely true, even though I say so myself. Read my books and you'll find out more, I hope. And I'm still not in jail, so I must be doing something right, engaging productively, I imagine. But again, I'm being facetious. Seriously speaking though, when I began to engage in reportage for Clear, Hold and Build, it began as a rant. I must offer full disclosure at this point. But as I sort of went halfway through the book, in my travels, in my reportage, I began to be invited. I suspect on account of a column I write for a newspaper called Mint every Friday, and I've done so since 2009, on issues of conflict, business and human rights. I started being invited by CEO forums. I started being invited by bankers, global bankers, who wanted me to discuss internal security, issues of business and human rights, CSR, and other matters of governance or non-governance with their very, very high-profile audiences. I began to be invited by business schools, management schools, and I asked myself, look, why are these guys calling a loose cannon like me? I mean, they must be doing it with a purpose. And I found that purpose to be engagement, that people were beginning to wake up and smell the coffee, if you will, about why these are important, these issues are important, why human rights is important, why real application of CSR is important. Even if they were looking at it from the basest or the most cynical point, is that they were trying to protect their own bottom lines, were trying to limit their liabilities. They were still looking at it from the prism of earnings over ethics, but they were beginning to look at ethics from a profitability point of view. And I said, bingo, that is exactly what my message is, that good practice is good business, bad practice is bad business, and it also brings with it bad blood. So then I told myself that clear, hold, and build shouldn't be about rant, it should be about engagement. So halfway through reportage and I write sort of alongside as I report and travel, because I tend to write in an episodic manner, so I can do it that way. I decided to I talked to my agent and I talked to my publishers, and I said, hey, listen, we need to change the approach for this book. The time for rant is over, the time for engagement is now. And Clear, Hold, Build is really a how-to book and a how not to book to do with business and human rights, application of CSR, what's happening globally, what's happening locally, and how different communities should be talking, working, and living more productively, being less rigid, being more engaged, and listening to other perspectives, and trying to move up from the level of rant, both from the left of center and the right of center, both from the activist perspective and the business perspective, so on and so forth. So, Clear, Hold, Build, Hard Lessons of Business and Human Rights is really an attempt that I have made to bring to leaders of business, business planners, accountants, often who take decisions without any realization of the socioeconomic effect downstream, if I may use a business terminology or term. And it really is to tell people that good practice is good business. As I said earlier, bad practice not only brings bad business, it brings bad blood, and it cannot be to the good of any business. How can conflict be to the profitability? How can conflict be good? So I think people really, really need to wake up and realize that, like globalization of capital, globalization of manufacturing, globalization of processes and consultancy, there is also a globalization of outrage. There's a globalization of networking. There's a globalization of activism. There's a globalization of liability. There's a globalization of judicial activism. For instance, any company now, if, for instance, is a company headquartered in India, but has an operation in England, or in the European Union, or in the Americas, or in Australia, or anywhere else in the world, can be taken to court for a crime or a perceived crime committed in India, because they are using other areas for business to raise money, to raise loans, to be in the stock market, to sell their product. So there is the liability is also taken on a global dimension. So you can't get away anymore, even though you think you can get away, and many people still continue to do so, it is getting more and more difficult to do so. And I'm so very happy this has happened, because I think I hope it leads to this globalization that I'm talking about, of awareness, of activism, of corporate social responsibility, I hope, in a true blue sense, or a blue chip sense, forgive the pun, has really come home to roost. Well, I express vitriolic angst even off camera. Read the book and you will know. But it is illustrative, as well as informative, as well as constructive, as well as instructional. So it is all, because one without the other doesn't make sense. If I say you must not go into conflict zones, then I must provide the reason why, as to why going into a conflict zone will be bad for you, because you'll be liable for human rights violation when if you go into a conflict zone, say in Chhattisgarh, to mine iron ore, to set up a steel plant, or to set up a power plant, and the police and paramilitary over there and go and kill dozens of villagers, and you're in the name of making it secure for the state, and here I'm using state in the larger sense, I mean India, and for you to do business, then you as a company, what business does SR Group have to go into Dantewada district in Chhattisgarh to mine iron ore and speak of setting up a steel plant? What business does Tata Steel have to go to Jagdalpur, to Bastar district, absolutely next door to an operational Maoist and counter insurgency area, to try and set up a steel plant? It is in abeyance right now, but nevertheless, in that same area, you have National Mineral Development Corporation, NMDC, which had a iron ore mining operation in the Bailadila range area, very well-known mining operation. But that predates the Maoist rebellion in that area, affectation in that area, or inflection in that area. Now, okay, in that case, NMDC is not to blame because the conflict has grown up around them. And the business and human rights issues that they face are actually as a result of that conflict going on around them. They're not the root cause. But once the conflict is up and running, and it is a laboratory of Maoism in a way in India now, it is the greatest concentration of insurgency and counter-insurgency in the country right now, even more than Jammu and Kashmir, even though that is more high profile. What business does a business have to go in to a zone of conflict, and what difference is then, and do not then we have a right to call that iron ore, blood iron ore, like diamond in conflict zones in Africa were once called blood diamond. And I'm not being lurid here, I'm not being sensationalistic, I'm not being anything of the above, I'm being realistic. By definition of business and human rights, this is a violation of human rights. So I need to make it illustrative, constructive, informative, and prescriptive. You use the word prescriptive, it definitely is. But it needs to be all of it, as I said earlier, in order for one element to make sense, in order for one element to really dovetail with the other and present a comprehensive picture. And I'm delighted that my engagement with businesses have increased since the book has come out. You would imagine, in conventional wisdom, might tell you that my engagement with the business community would reduce after the book came out, because they'd be outraged at all the accusations that I'm evidently making, using their data, not mine. I'm a bit devious about that. I use actual data, published data, recorded data, on the record, on cam, on recorder, on annual reports, in documents. I haven't made up a single damn thing in that book. I've used government data, and I've used research data and corporate data to make my case. Now, I'm happy to say, and that gives me hope, and that told me that the change of course for the book was the right decision to take, is that I've addressed conferences where I've been on panel with business houses, and this is a conference of public affairs professionals who do a lot of spin doctoring and hand-holding, and they're the bridge often between business and government. They invited me to talk to them in New Delhi. I go and give talks at Indian Institute of Management in Ahmedabad and elsewhere. I've just got a text message from the director of Indian Institute of Management, Indore, saying he's reviewed my book in his blog, and he's looking forward to my visit to IIM Indore. Now, what more can a writer ask for, really? And I'm so delighted that it's, and I travel, talk to management students, I talk to faculty, I'm talking to businesses, I'm talking to government, and I'm grateful, and I'm very, very happy that the stated purpose of the book, and very transparent purpose of the book, has taken root and is beginning to fly quite robustly. And I hope this merely adds to the necessary body of work in the area of business and human rights, in corporate social responsibility, in corporate governance, and in true blue development, economic development and equity that India and South Asia need so very badly. Well, the thing is that, and I'm very happy you asked the questions, it is not as if earlier people did not feel aggrieved. According to one estimate, a reliable estimate, since India's independence, since the first 5-year plan, 60 million people have been displaced on account of various projects, of which an estimated 3/4 of 60 million people have not been resettled or rehabilitated properly. Okay? Now that's a staggering figure. Imagine the negative energy floating around, which is being created, which is being increased as we speak. It is increasing. I think people were aggrieved earlier. The incidents were localized because of relatively primitive communication systems. The outrage or the reaction to these projects were localized, were more effectively kept away from national discourse, because these were in what I call outland, out of sight and out of mind of urban spaces. And after all, this is where a lot of decision making takes place. Boardrooms, rooms of governance, public policy, government policy, all happen in capitals, state capitals, national capitals, in urban zones, in metropolitan areas, where the suites or the boardrooms are located, policy rooms are located. What happens out there in the jungles, in the forests, in the hills, in the plains, in the valleys, etc., for natural resource use. I won't even call it exploitation. I will call it use of resource. Let's be fair and call it use of resource. But it becomes exploitation the moment you take the communities who've been living there for granted. It becomes exploitation the minute you resettle a community, but you do not rehabilitate them. There's a difference between resettlement and rehabilitation. We tend to confuse the two. There is a there is a principle called the principle of non-retrogression, which has been popularized by a fine, upstanding analyst and commentator on business and human rights from Europe called Luc Zanprit. I think he's Belgian. Forgive me if I'm pronouncing his name incorrectly. He speaks of the aspect of non-retrogression, that a community who has been thus affected, project affected or displaced, must live as well, if not better, than they used to. That is the least a project or a business must do for the communities. After all, what is aspiration? What is development? You can't expect the company or the business or the executives and the shareholders to do better and expect the community to do worse. It simply doesn't make sense. It may lead to profit motive, but it doesn't make for good business practice or good corporate responsibility practice. So there were always anxiety and concern about these things in far-flung communities. I think what has highlighted a lot of things is like people have become more aware of politics or policies. People have become more aware of very many things and they've been able to communicate their concerns and their worries on account of better connectivity and on account of greater spread of media, whether it's television, social networking, telephony. There is greater sense of engagement and there is greater penetration of these concerns and sharing of these concerns and these case studies and examples of communities who feel that they've been done out of something. When people were shot in Goa, in an obscure mining village in Jharkhand, southern Jharkhand, in the 1980s, and there were several incidents, it hardly made a blip. And it was a tragic incident where Bihar police attacked tribal people who would come to register a silent and unarmed protest at that particular point of time, which led actually to the Jharkhand Mukti Morcha, the Maoists coming into the Saranda forests, etc., etc., etc. Now, when Kalinganagar happened in 2006, it went national. It was on television, it was in media, it was on the internet. There was no way that the business or the government could scrub it. Nobody could whitewash it, nobody could scrub it, nobody could make it go away. If it has gone away from the hearts and minds of people, it has gone away because they've been participants in the corporate project or the government project of making ourselves feel good and look good and get on with life. So if it receded from memory, then it receded by design. But the default memory remains. It's all over the internet. It's in research papers. You can't wish incidents away. Lafarge cannot wish away its case file, if you will, of its transgressions and grave transgressions in Meghalaya to mine limestone. POSCO, the Pohang Iron and Steel Company Limited of South Korea, which has a subsidiary called POSCO India, my apologies, cannot remove themselves from responsibility and liability from the Orissa government actually beating people up on behalf of the company. So POSCO India cannot distance itself, cannot scrub away the fact that on its behalf, the government of Orissa and its agencies like IDCO and other agencies actually assaulted people and mistreated people and coerced people to get off the land that was earmarked for POSCO. And the tagline for IDCO, the Industrial Development Corporation of Orissa, is ITCO, the friendly facilitator. Now, which is a lie. I mean, is the government living a lie? And is POSCO India, who are active participants in that lie, are they to be liable? I think they would be definitely liable. So it is not alarmist, it is realistic, and Clear Hole Build hopes to bridge the gap of real and unreal, the ground reality and perception, perception and profit, profit and profitability, and liability and profit, and any combination that you choose to pick or cherry pick, if you will, and bring it all together in an easily digestible format, so that those who need to can relate to it as easily as possible. And I hope some of you get to read the book, spread the word, and please keep the faith. And if you have any suggestions or complaints or compliments, I'm at sudeep.chakravarti@gmail.com. I'm on Facebook. I have 2 accounts. Don't ask me how or why, but you're very, very welcome to stay engaged, because that's why I write, to stay engaged with you. Thank you very much.